Welcome into the Week 8 episode of the ESPN Australia New Zealand NFL Brekkie Show, brought to you by the Next Gen Ford Everest. Conquer each and every day in the Next Gen Ford Everest. I'm Laurie Horesh. As you can see, I'm without my usual co-host, Phil Murphy. My partner in crime is off this week, but with Halloween all around us, plenty of football action and a Monday Night Football Ohio showdown between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Cleveland Browns. We'll not be alone today. We're going to turn over to the NFL Nation host of reporters and a man that doesn't just know a whole bunch about the NFL, the Cincinnati Bengals, how they might overcome the loss of their number one, literally, in Jamar Chase, but also a lover of the fine game of cricket. Ben Baby joining us all the way from the fine state of Ohio. Very lucky to be joined by a special guest now on the ESPN Australia New Zealand NFL Brekkie Show, all the way from the fine city, usually in Cincinnati, but making the trip to Cleveland. Our ESPN NFL Nation Bengals reporter, Ben Baby. Ben, thank you so much for sparing some time on the road as you get ready to cover the Bengals in a Monday Night Football showdown.
Yeah, it's interesting. The time change is unique. Normally, I'm up in the middle of the night, especially when my beloved Indians are playing a test match over there. I'm always up at like 1 o'clock or 2 in the morning. So it feels good to finally be on the other side of this time change.
And you're welcome on our time zone anytime you choose. And I want to touch on that quickly because for those that don't know, everybody who follows you and those who aren't and are tuned into the NFL and the Bengals in particular, if you're not following Ben Baby, jump on social media now and get around his coverage. Apart from being a devout football man and covering the Cincinnati Bengals day in, day out on the beat over there, you are a cricket lover. Where did the love of one of our national sports, arguably our national sport down here in Australia and over in New Zealand, we won't talk about the All Blacks or anything like that right now, but where did the love of cricket come from growing up all the way over there in Texas?
Yeah, well, my family is Indian. I'm a first-generation Indian American, and it's one of the few sports we're good at internationally. We got to take a lot of pride in it. When I was in India, last time I was over there, it's been almost 20 years, but I remember catching glimpses of a cricket match. And luckily now, especially stateside, with it being on ESPN Plus, all of the Indian national team games right now, the T20 World Cup, which is in Australia. We won't talk about India's latest match against South Africa. We'll kind of leave that to the side. But it's been a lot easier now to follow them. And so, it's been fun following the action. Obviously loved Australian fans probably didn't like it as much as I did. But the test match the test series, I should say, that India had last year was phenomenal. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's funny. My church pastor is Australian, and so whenever he wants to talk cricket, I was like, yeah, I'm right here for you if you want to talk. So it's always fun.
Nothing will endear you to the Australian and the Kiwi audience quite like talking about getting up in all sorts of disgusting hours in the middle of the night to watch sport. It is something that we feel very proud about. It's baggage that we carry with a stoicness, and I know I speak for a lot of the folks down here, especially in the Eastern Seaboard in Sydney and Melbourne, New South Wales, Victoria. We click over to 5 a.m. starts for our Monday football next week, having started at 3, moved to 4. 5 a.m. clicks in week 9, and that is a huge reprieve, especially as I've entered my 30s and parenthood, where sleep is at an absolute premium, and I don't bounce back quite like I used to. All right, let's get to some actual football stuff here. The Bengals have been one of the most interesting, intriguing teams to follow the last couple of years. Big news with Jamar Chase set to be out for a 4 to 6 week period. We'll see how that plays out, not going on injured reserve. When you look at the team, you spend all your time around the roster, in the locker room, at training. How do you expect them to overcome a loss like number one not being out there on the paddock to connect with Joe Burrow?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this offense looks. And, there's been a lot of conversation about this being, a team with a really deep top 3 receiving group. When you talk about Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and, conversation about, those guys arguably all 3 potential number 1 receivers on different teams. And you look at the numbers they put up, only team entering this week to have 3 guys with over 400 yards. When you look at what they've done, Tyler Boyd coming off a career performance. We know what T. Higgins can do, especially towards the end of last year. And then, Jamar Chase is Jamar Chase. And we talked to Tyler Boyd in the locker room on Friday, I believe, or Saturday. I can't get any of my days right when you got Monday Night Football on the schedule. But we talked to Boyd, and he said that there isn't any extra pressure on him and T because they know that every week, they're going to be involved in the game plan. They know what their targets are going to look like, and they have to produce. And both of those guys also in interesting situations as well. It hasn't really been talked about a lot, but Tyler Boyd, his long-term future, when you look at the salary cap situation moving forward, what will they do with his contract? It seems like that's going to need some action, even though there's about a year left on that, going in next year. And then T. Higgins will be extension eligible starting next year. So both of those guys have a lot to play for. And so there's plenty at stake for them personally, but as a team, they know what they get with those two guys. And then you also have, guys like Joe Mixon, you have a tight end Hayden Hurst, two guys who have been pretty effective in the pass game. Mixon, especially when you look at the targets. I know a lot of fantasy football players were wondering what Mixon was going to be like in the passing game. And so far, getting a ton of targets, and Joe Burrow more than happy to take those checkdowns and be patient as defenses try to limit those explosive plays. But we'll see who gets those reps and those targets with Jamar Chase out over the next few weeks. Maybe you see Trenton Irwin getting called up from the practice squad. Right now, Mike Thomas and Trent Taylor, potentially guys who could get those targets. And we know that the Bengals worked out a few receivers, I believe, on Saturday, if I'm getting my days correct. We saw them in the facility. So we'll see if the Bengals want to shore up the back end of that roster. But right now, this is going to be a good test to see exactly how good this offense is without Jamar Chase.
All right, I want to circle back to some of the names that could be sneaking little, we call them smokies down here, but under the radar that might step up. We'll close with that as we throw to the big contest on Monday Night Football. Me and Phil usually do a little propaganda. It's our prop off. I'm not going to ask you to step in for that because, quite frankly, I've been wiping the floor with him this year, and I don't need your expertise coming in and buoying his tally by any stretch of the imagination. So he clawed back like $1 a unit last week, but I'm not going to ask you to do that, but we might ask for a name to keep an eye on in the big showdown. I want to throw it to the audience, though, because I threw it out there on social media that we were having you join the show, not just the Bengals beat maestro, but a cricket connoisseur, and naturally our audience and our listeners, watchers, fans decide they just hybridize everything and throw it in there, mix it all up, the cricket and the Bengals. So Elliot wanted to ask, and credit to his creativity, if you were to pick a Cincinnati Bengals player to launch a 6 into Bay 13 at the MCG, who would be the most likely?
Ooh, that's a good question. Jamar Chase just hit one. He couldn't clear the boundary the other day when he tried to punt the ball into the stadium at the Superdome. So I'm going to go Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd, chunked the ball into the end zone. He's got a lot of flair. He seems like a guy who is not afraid to challenge, the guys on the boundary, challenge the field. I feel like he would be more than happy to go take on the short ball and just launch that thing deep.
Yeah, and being a technician as he is working out of the slot, you expect the finer details are going to come naturally to someone like Tyler Boyd. All right, similar note, and this may land with the receivers as well, but you've got to line up a Cincinnati player at gully where catches are flying fast, they're flying quick, and these are prime opportunities. So you've got to put a Bengals player in the gully, and they've got to offer up a little chirp. Not only are they there for safe hands, but they're offering a little back talk, little trash talk. Who are you turning to from that Bengals roster?
Well, that's a good question because you need good hands and you got to have good sledging ability. And you can't have that sledging backfire. As Tim Payne found out when he sledged Ashwin last year, you sledge, you better be able to do it correctly. Otherwise, they will come and it'll backfire on you. So that's a great question. I would go, honestly, Jamar seems like a good option because he does like to talk a lot. He has pretty good hands. Tyler Boyd may actually be the guy again. The guy doesn't have a lot of drops. I believe no drops on the season. Does like to chirp a little bit here and there. So I'm going to go Boyd both ways. I think at this point, just put Boyd in the top of the lineup. All I know is the Australian Aaron Finch is lucky that Boyd can't play cricket. Otherwise, he might be taking Finch's spot in the T20 lineup.
I was going to say, if I was thinking defensively, Jesse Bates' work over his career with the hands at the back end as a free-ranging deep safety there would speak up. But I don't know. You would know this. You are on the ground there. Jesse Bates doesn't strike me as one of the most braggadocious trash talkers, almost a silent assassin back there. Is that a fair summation of what he brings to the table?
Yeah, I think Jesse just goes about his business and, especially with the way his contract situation has worked out the last couple of years, he's been an absolute pro and you don't hear that secondary, a lot of banter outside of Eli Apple. That would be the one, but he might be a liability in the field. So I don't know if you want him in the slip cordon out there playing gully. So that's the only thing with Eli, but no, Jesse has been a big piece to this team. And, it's interesting, you go back and you look at the touchdown that the Bengals gave up against the Falcons in cover 3. I thought it was fascinating. I asked the defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, what that coverage scheme was. And he said, basically it wasn't your traditional cover 3 where you're playing thirds. You had Jesse Bates taking up half the field with Eli Apple and Von Bell playing quarter. So quarter, half. And that shows you how versatile Jesse is, how much range he has. And Jesse, obviously this year, because of the contract situation, trying to prove his value not only to the Bengals this year, but long-term really to every other team in the NFL. So, that's going to be something to watch. What will Amari Cooper be able to get against, his friend Chidobe Awuzie, their chess buddies? That has been well documented, and we'll see how the Bengals play. Do they go with that Browns rushing attack? Do they send Von Bell into the box? Do they put Jesse in the box? He's been in the box a lot throughout the year. Will they play a lot of single high? All fascinating questions because that Browns run game is very good.
I mean, look what we're getting from you. We've had cricket chat. We're talking Bengals. We've got chess, and you brought up cover 6 for the first time, I believe, on the NFL Brekkie Show in our history. We're being spoiled here today. I'm going to spoil Riley Beveridge here, who sent in a couple of questions. He demanded to be shouted out as the biggest and only Bengals fan in Australia. I will say he's the biggest and most tragic Bengals fan in Australia because I know there's a few others out there, but I know he lives and dies rather hard by this. And he wanted to know Bengals locker room, let's say it's a victory or pregame, who do you turn to? Who is the locker room DJ? Who is the aficionado at the helm of the Spotify playlist or whatever platform we're getting our beats from?
It's a great question because normally the music is going before we get in the locker room, so we can never suss out who's playing what. But there is I don't know who it is, but I feel like on slow days you get someone playing a lot of old Drake. And as someone who was in their 30s, and that was when I was younger, I fully appreciate that. Sometimes when they play some of the newer stuff, I feel very old and washed. And so that gets tough. I feel like Tyler Boyd's got a good taste in things. Mike Hilton has a really good taste in music, likes a lot of Young Dolph, lots of Gunna. And so that practice playlist is booming. We wrote a story actually about the Bengals and practice DJs around the NFL who has those duties. In Cincinnati, Sam Staley, their equipment manager or their assistant equipment manager, is a guy who dials up the tunes at practice. We heard some 50 Cent, Many Men the other day. So Sam is usually pretty reliable with the aux. So I would actually say not a player. Just go ahead and give it to Sam and you're going to be in good hands.
All right, and one more from Riley as we get a little more football related here. Will the Bengals look for receiver help before the trade deadline in the wake of the injury? My guess from this far away, from 16,000 kilometers away, is that would seem like an overreaction, especially if Chase is to be back this season. And considering the wide receivers you mentioned, what you're getting out of Hurst's arrival at tight end and then the capable hands of Joe Mixon coming out of the backfield, would you expect them to flirt and get into any mix in the last kind of 24 hours or so before the deadline hits?
Yeah, that remains to be seen. We saw them working guys out. And I feel like, when Zach Taylor, the Bengals head coach, talked about the receivers that they currently have, he noted that a lot of the guys have been in the system, for an extended amount of time, whether in Cincinnati or previously, Trent Taylor coming from San Francisco in that Shanahan scheme that Taylor is also part of that. They all operate a lot of the same concepts. Mike Thomas was with them in LA, and he was actually, when T. Higgins went down against Baltimore, you saw Mike Thomas step up and actually play pretty well when his number was called. So you wonder if he might not be an option. When you look at it, I believe, Arfield Yates looked at the cap situation, and interestingly enough, the Bengals are one of the teams without a ton of cap space. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Do you have, the numbers to take on any kind of salary towards the end of the year? And that is something to put in the equation as well. But, I think, like you said, it might be a bit of an overreaction, especially if you're not putting him in IR. You feel like he could be back within 4 weeks. And, I feel like is someone you're getting, we looked at the guys they worked out as a D.D. Westbrook, as a Daz Newsome. Is somebody coming in, who in through free agency going to be better than some of the guys who know the system really well and have been here for a couple of years? And is that worth the money that's going to cost you?
No, I think that's a pretty comprehensive look at just why, despite the noise around the narrative, it's worth taking some time to look at what the Bengals put together. They've in this time that Chase is out, they've already overcome some early season struggles. The offense wasn't flowing. It was one of these units in those first couple of weeks. We were watching teams like Green Bay and the Rams feel like these tense, tight offenses where it wasn't flowing, wasn't rhythm. They weren't finding wide open receivers, and the Bengals seem to problem solve that better than some of those other names that I just mentioned. All right. We've been in Cincinnati. We've touched on cricket. I'm reeling you back to Texas here quickly because my usual co-host, Phil Murphy, is off this week. And I happen to know that he has been frequenting the Kansas City area. And he's been talking glowingly about the world-famous Kansas City barbecue. And he says it's the greatest in the world. As a proud son of Texas, do you have a rebuttal to that or any thoughts on that claim?
Listen, Phil is great. He does a great job. That's a very bad barbecue take. I'm going to be quite honest here because I've been to Kansas City. I've had the Z-Man at Joe's. It's good, but no one is topping some good brisket that's been smoked for an extended amount of time, some jalapeno sausage, get you some good sides. And if you sell it, the Bengals radio guy, Dan Horde, who does an excellent job on the play-by-play, he does stuff for the University of Cincinnati as well. And they were in Dallas last week when the Cincinnati played SMU, and he went to a Hard 8, which is one of the barbecue spots. And he was like, I'm in heaven. Yeah, I said, it's good when they sell it by the pound. You load up with a quarter pound of brisket, quarter pound of sausage, and you're set. So, I've eaten in Memphis. I've eaten in the Carolinas. I've eaten the barbecue in Kansas City, in Texas. I know I am biased, but I also trust my taste buds. It is easily the best. Everyone else, anybody can do pork. Pork is fine, but it takes a true pro to smoke brisket the appropriate way. So that's why I'm giving Texas the nod.
All I'll say is that around Sydney and around Melbourne and cities around Australia, you're seeing more and more barbecue places jump up and pop up. And the produce is down here is great. The meat's good. But I will say that they're normally called Texas barbecue. It's normally dry rub. It's normally that style. We're not seeing as much Kansas City. So that's just Australia's vote, or at least the connoisseurs and chefs that have gone over to the States have come back, and what they've come back with lines up with your take there. I'm conscious of your time, so I don't want to keep you for too much longer, as much fun as we're having. I want to ask a question because it is Halloween week, and we're talking about different teams that we expect. It's this fat middle class, right? That's why the trade deadline, in my opinion, is so interesting, because so many teams are at that 3-4 win mark that it's just going to take – how many are going to think, oh, you know what, not that many really good teams. Let's make one move and maybe we can be one of them. And there has been a lot of mixed results so far. You spend your time primarily in the AFC, so I wanted to ask you, there was a zombie team that you think of, a team that you think is going to come back to life or really come roaring to life in the second half of the season, whether that is with a move or just you think their roster is going to get in a more symbiotic shape, maybe more chemistry on field. If I was to ask you from the AFC side of things, which team fit that bill, what comes to mind first for you?
It's a good question. Because you look at it like, to qualify as a zombie, you've got to be dead. And if you're the AFC is so congested that if you're dead, you're sitting at the bottom of the conference. You've got no shot. Jacksonville is one of those teams you're wondering, should they be a little bit better? But, they have their problems. Looking at it, I was initially going to pick the Broncos because it seems like, they're a team that's under 500. You figure at some point this Russell Wilson trade is going to work out. He has Jerry Jeudy, who I've been a big fan of since he was at Alabama. But maybe it's the Chargers, and I say that because they haven't really played as well as people would have thought. And you wonder what's going on there on paper. Now, granted, I have Keenan Allen on my fantasy team, so I understand the injury situations that have happened over there now with Mike Williams. They're trying to figure that out. But I think you've got to have confidence that Justin Herbert is going to be that quarterback that we think he can. We wonder if Brandon Staley can figure some of these things out and kind of continue to show improvement. And that offense, I feel like, is one that maybe isn't. It's dead-ish. It's a little zombie-like. So we'll see and that may be the best explanation. But it's really hard to find a team that's really out of it, because when you look at it, from like 1 to 8 or 9, there's so many teams that theoretically it wouldn't shock me if they're representing the AFC in the Super Bowl. So there is hopefully over these next couple of weeks we'll figure out who the real contenders are outside of Buffalo, Kansas City, and maybe even Cincinnati, because right now that point differential looks pretty good.
Coming into this week, there were 23 teams out of the 32 that were sitting at 3-4 or better, which just speaks to how chunky and how loaded in a confusing way that middle class was, how stacked it was, and what we're waiting to sort itself out. And with the Chargers, anytime you see Justin Herbert's, his depth of target or his air yards per attempt sitting down low, he's having games where it's sitting around like 3 yards of air yardage per attempt in a game with that caliber of quarterback. That's mind-numbing. The amount of plays thrown around the line of scrimmage or shorter line of scrimmage with what you have there, you feel like the dam's got to break, and the realization, the light bulb has to come on that, we need to be doing something, whether that's mugging up the protection, whether that's just going max protect, whatever you can to free this guy's arm up and his ridiculous arm talent. All right, I'm going to let you go with it's a double feature here. It's your tips. It's a little bit your smokies, your dark horses, or your insider knowledge. It's a double feature. One, I wanted to know if we're expecting outside of Tyler Boyd and outside of T. Higgins and perhaps outside of Joe Mixon, a receiving threat to emerge in this contest against the Browns. And while Jamar Chase is out, what name would that be? And equally on the smoky, sneaky, under the radar list, if you got 24 hours to spend in Cincinnati, what are 2 or 3 spots that are must hits while you're in town? You got 24 hours to do it. So we'll start with the player, and then if we can get your tourism expertise for the fine city of Cincinnati, Ohio, and then we'll let you get on out of here.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds good. I feel like as I try to wrap my brain and figure out, I'm still trying to figure out 3 things that I would want to do. But in the meantime, I feel like Hayden Hurst, the Bengals tight end, I feel like he's a guy who seems like a no-brainer to get more targets. I mean, it's no coincidence that after the first week against Pittsburgh, when you saw how open Hayden Hurst was, that teams immediately decided to play Tampa 2 coverage, which is that middle linebacker or a linebacker or somebody carrying that tight end up the field, because Hayden did what we thought he would when he came from Atlanta, be someone who can stretch the defense vertically. And when you have, the Bengals, when they're at their best, they're running those vertical routes. And when Joe Burrow's seeing the field as well as he is, and when you look at how wide the Bengals are as a offensive formation, there's a lot of space to run around and for those vertical gaps to be had. And so if you're taking away Mixon, you're taking away the other 2 receivers, I would expect that Hayden Hurst will be somebody who could emerge as someone who gets a few more targets, a guy who made it an emphasis when he came to Cincinnati to build that rapport with Joe Burrow. He went down to Florida, got a few days of throwing in with him to get that kind of chemistry and rapport that you need to have. And we saw that at times last year with CJ Uzomah and Burrow. And I think that you started to see that a little bit with Hurst and Burrow as well. And Hurst has been a very good addition for Cincinnati. Now, for the 3 things you'd want to do in December, I think that going ice skating at Fountain Square is a good time, walking around that downtown in the riverfront, the Roebling Bridge. Cincinnati's got a gorgeous kind of riverfront area. It's where, like, when I go running, I think it's great. The Mount Adams area, I think, is phenomenal. There's a lot of good spots out there, and it's just a really cozy environment and neighborhood. I feel kind of like I'm almost back in like San Francisco. It's very strange. It just kind of feel that area plop down. So Cincinnati, I do get a lot of heat for not liking the cold up there, and I do get a little bundled up. But all in all, as long as you bring a good jacket, bring some good gloves, and the wind isn't howling too much, it's going to be a good time.
I mean, Ben, you've given us absolutely everything. It would be incredibly rude of me to ask anything else. But as Phil says, he'd attest to, perhaps I can be a little rude at some point, because one more question I'll throw out there, because Brad, who is a regular listener, I know he tweeted at us. He wanted to know if you do have a Big Bash side in the Big Bash League, being the cricket fan that you are. And if you don't, can he suggest the Strikers to you? Do you have a Big Bash team, or are you still a free agent in that market?
I'm still a Big Bash free agent, so I'm ready for all comers. I do like that Australian team. The cricket played over there. The pitches that have been there for the World Cup have been phenomenal. Really opposite of what we've seen in the Middle East over the last I like the fact that the bowlers have been in play throughout the World Cup, and so if you give me a Big Bash option, I will see. I'm trying to think of who I feel like there's a Chris Gale maybe, who's always just like a merchant, a T20 merchant. Like, I'm just out here.
Yeah,
you show me the paycheck, I will come play for you. So basically the opposite of David Warner. So I will be more than happy to just give me a side, and I will pick it.
Ben, I can't ask any more of you, despite my final little request that went in there. It's been great chatting. You've even thrown in a little David Warner jab there at the end, which we are always welcome for down in these parts. So thank you very much for the time. I hope the Monday Night Football showdown is everything that we're looking forward to in prime time. Hope it's not the temperature's not dipping too quickly over there for you on the sideline down there. But again, thanks for joining us on the Brekkie NFL show, and all the best. We'll talk to you later in the season.
Sounds good.